my goodness. President Trump visiting Steve Scalise's bedside last night at 8:40 in an unannounced visit to MedStar.
And Leland Vittert is live from the White House with the latest for us. Good morning, Leland.
Oh, good morning, Inslee. Good morning, guys. We're learning a little bit more about the Majority Whip's condition and what happened yesterday. That bullet went through his hip and then through his pelvis, so he is going to need multiple additional surgeries before he recovers. Currently now in critical condition, had to have a number of blood transfusions yesterday. The president was at the hospital last night checking on Representative Scalise and talking to a number of the doctors there. Left about 9:30 in the evening, and then he tweeted out, "Just left hospital. Rep. Steve Scalise, one of the truly great people, is in very tough shape, but he is a real fighter. Pray for Steve." Earlier, the president said this.
Congressman Scalise is a friend, and a very good friend. He's a patriot, and he's a fighter. He will recover from this assault. America is praying for you, and America is praying for all of the victims of this terrible shooting.
In addition to Scalise, 4 others were injured in the attack. The president also visited Crystal Griner of the Capitol Police yesterday. In her hospital room, Special Agent David Bailey was treated and released from the hospital yesterday. Thursday morning now, 7 o'clock here at the White House, and the president is getting back to politics of sorts, tweeting out, "They made up a phony collusion with the Russia story, found 0 proof, so now they go for obstruction of justice on phony story. Nice." That came about 6 minutes ago. The president also continuing his trip to Miami tomorrow. There was some talk about whether that would be rescheduled, but we're told the president will head to Miami, guys, to talk about a change in the policy towards Cuba, essentially rolling back some of the Obama-era changes. Back to you guys.
Wow, thanks, Leland. And great job out in the field yesterday getting some of the most insightful interviews from the eyewitnesses. Thanks.
All right, and the Washington Post drops that story about the obstruction of justice on the president's birthday. Meanwhile, let's bring in Michelle Malkin. She's a host of Michelle Malkin Investigates on CRTV.com. She joins us from Colorado Springs. Michelle, the cover of the Daily News today, hunting Republicans, and he was hunting us. Target GOP. It looks like it was a political assassination to some.
Yeah, and I'm not going to pussyfoot around. Yeah, I'm not going to pussyfoot around that, Steve. This was clearly an act of political violence against the right and conservatives. And so many of the apologists on the extreme left who are trying to ignore that are part of a pattern that I have followed for almost 20 years now. Anytime there have been acts of political violence against conservatives and the right, or a fomenting and a festering of hate, a climate of hate, as I've called it for many years on my blog and my website, what is the pattern? What is the reaction of so many of these apologists? They will either ignore this violence, they will excuse it, or they'll blame the victim.
What would you like to see different?
Well, what I'd like to see is some sort of honest acknowledgement from people of good faith on the left. And I know they're out there. I think it's really important not to dehumanize people in the public square. Yes, every day I get up and I do rhetorical battle with people that I disagree with. But I think it's this dehumanization over the years, particularly among liberal elites in Hollywood, in the media, in power centers, on the coastal bubbles. I mean, that's how we have all these people who talk about the root causes, right? Well, a lot of it stems from dehumanizing and demonizing people that you disagree with. Right. And I want to say something on a personal level here, guys. I moved away from D.C. Almost a decade ago, because I found it to be such a toxic environment. There are good people there, but when you become so absorbed and consumed only by politics, this is what results. You've got people on the internet who are so obsessed with hating Donald Trump that they're making awful, vile comments about his wife, about his 11-year-old child. Get a life. breathe.
Absolutely. And you know, too, that there are people on the right that are unhinged and misinterpret a lot of what whoever the leader is at the time, whether it's President Bush or President Trump, and think, I'm going to go fight for him. And we don't want to be the launching point there. I am foolishly enough optimistic that things are going to change. And one of the reasons is, I read in the New York Times, of all places today, these words: President Trump said just the right thing after the attack. They say, and they quote Donald Trump, "We may have our differences, but we do well in times like these to remember that everyone who serves in our nation's capital is there because, above all, they love our country." And I think that if people realize, man, if I had anything to do with launching this lunatic, I don't want that blood on my hands, maybe things will change.
Yeah, well, maybe they will. Unfortunately, if you look at the rest of that editorial, it's quite vile. It talks about toxic politics in America, but they can't refrain themselves at the New York Times editorial board, the vile fish wrap of record. They can't refrain themselves in playing too coquet, right? And blaming Sarah Palin for the Gabby Giffords shooting. They actually did that. It's a lie. Their own paper had reported that Jared Loughner, the shooter in that case, had been obsessed and fixated on Gabby Giffords since 2007, and yet they blame Sarah Palin's 2010 map on that. Those people have learned nothing. Those are not people of good faith. And I know there are people of good faith out there, and they need to speak up about this climate of hate. Yes, there are extremists on all sides. But the problem is that whether we're talking about political violence against conservatives on campus, beheading, rhetoric and imagery from Hollywood liberals that hate conservatives and Donald Trump, to just a couple of days ago when you had one of these Antifa protesters stabbing a police horse in the neck at Act for America's anti-Sharia protest. There's a problem on the left, and they need to acknowledge it.
Michelle, should all the congressmen now have security detail? I'm looking at some of the stats. The rank-and-file lawmakers are saying they're getting up to 4 security threats each year. Nancy Pelosi gets way more than that, this article says. Representative Claudia Tenney said yesterday, after all this happened, she got a threat, 1 down, 216 to go, and we assume that number is the Republicans who voted for Obamacare repeal. Should all these congressmen get security detail? Unless you're a top-ranking member, you don't get that all the time.
Well, it's a serious discussion we need to have. It's very scary. And I remember when Claudia Tenney was just a candidate in New York, and this is a mom of a military family that was compelled to run. How is it that she is a target now simply for espousing political values that some nutball out there can't stand or tolerate? What it does, of course, underscore is how important that security detail and all of the law enforcement officials were in preventing a massacre. And that cannot be repeated enough. Because, again, there has been a war, a rhetorical war and a literal war on police and law enforcement officers in this country. Words matter. Words have consequences.
Surely. And so many of the words these days are online, you know, Twitter and Facebook. And the temperature has gone up so high. And you were talking about Claudia Tenney. So she got an email that said 1 down, 216 to go, after Steve Scalise was shot. And then you've got Ron DeSantis. Apparently somebody called him yesterday and said, glad it happened. Trump ought to be next. How much of the rhetoric, which is so over the top now, and we've been, you know, it was over the top in many cases during the Obama administration and in the 43 Bush administration as well. But how much do you blame on social media and the various platforms where people can be anonymous and so hateful at the same time?
Well, I wrote a book in 2011 called Unhinged, and I filled 300 pages almost with vile left-wing rhetoric against women. I talked about misogyny that we saw in the public square against conservatives, against police, against the military, assassination, fascination against George W. Bush. This is not new. There were off-Broadway plays where they were inveighing people to stand up and say, quote, I'm going to kill the president. So social media certainly exacerbates the problem, but this has been pre-existing. And again, I think there needs to be an explicit acknowledgement. Where are the Democrat leaders? You know, instead of this half-hearted editorial from the New York Times that had to go and blame the victims for the GOP shooting, essentially, by blaming, quote-unquote, right-wing rhetoric, why don't they just stand up and say, you know what? We've got a problem in our movement, and we're going to do something about it. We're going to do more than just pay lip service to peace and tolerance and civility.
There you go. All right, Michelle Malkin, out in Colorado somewhere where she lives now. We thank you very much for joining us live.
Thank you, Michelle. All right, let's hand it over to Jillian with some breaking news. Good morning.
That's right. Good morning to you guys, to you at home as well. Let's begin with the breaking news right now. We want to get you caught up on a Fox News alert. An explosion at the entrance of a kindergarten in China, north of Shanghai. Local reports say it happened as classes were wrapping up. There are reports several people are dead. We will update you on this story as more information becomes available. Also breaking right now, the FBI is interrogating a man who claimed there was a dirty bomb on a container ship in South Carolina. A YouTube conspiracy theorist saying it was placed on board during a recent trip to the Middle East. Authorities clearing the port of Charleston overnight after finding no credible threats. Developing overnight, North Korea says they released American student Otto Warmbier on humanitarian grounds. The 22-year-old in a hospital in Cincinnati after spending 17 months as a prisoner of the rogue nation. This brand new picture showing him moments after touching down in the U.S. You see it right there. And as you can see, two men are holding him up, carrying him to an ambulance. He's semi-conscious. His parents say he was brutalized by his captors and slipped into a coma for a year.
Last night, being able to see Otto for the first time in, gosh, I bet it's 18 months, it was fantastic. You know, Otto's not in great shape right now, and he's been through a real tough time, and it's great to have him with us.
Tucker Carlson spoke exclusively to his parents. The full interview airs tonight at 8 p.m. Eastern. And we saw firsthand how officers round up MS-13 gang members when Brian went for a ride-along in Suffolk County, New York. Well, officers, they're at it again. And we just learned ICE arrested 40 suspected gang members in the New York City area in just 30 days. The Trump administration has promised to dismantle the deadly gang, largely made up of immigrants from South America. And Brian, I know you're probably closely watching that story.
Yeah, it's 20 miles from my house.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's scary.
Yeah, crazy.
Thank you, Jillian.
Thanks, Jillian.
Meanwhile, did you hear Congressman Davis say this?
This is a result, I believe, of political rhetorical terrorism. That has to stop.
Is he right? That congressman here live with more on those comments.
And many lawmakers saying nobody would have survived yesterday's shooting if it wasn't for Capitol Police. Dan Bongino is a former Secret Service agent, and he says it's time we reevaluate how we protect our elected leaders. We'll talk to him. Robert Mueller is now reporting, according to the Washington Post, that there is an investigation on President Trump for obstruction of justice. Now, nobody else has this story, but they say they talked to 5 people who were briefed on interview requests to talk to them about their interactions with the president. It's the former deputy NSA director. It is Dan Coats, the new National Intelligence Director, as well as Admiral Rogers, who runs the NSA right now. They want to talk to Robert Mueller at the end of this week, which will be today or tomorrow, or at the beginning of next week, about their interactions with the president and what he may or may not have said about moving forward with an investigation on Michael Flynn and Russia.
Whether or not he asked any of those leaders to end the investigation into General Flynn. The White House is saying that did not happen. In fact, the president tweeted about it.
He did. Just within the last half hour, the president tweeted. They made up a phony collusion with a Russian story, found 0 proof. So now they go for obstruction of justice on the phony story. Nice. Keep in mind, a lot of this, we saw this coming. I mean, clearly after Mr. Comey's testimony, where he said, the president said, I hope you can do this for me. And then you had the intel community leaders under cross-examination by members of Congress last week. they were reluctant to talk about what the president had or had not told them because they said it's a longstanding precedent. But nonetheless, all of them said they were not pressured by the president to change, to go ahead and drop the investigation.
Right, so we'll have to see.
This is unbelievable that they have this special investigation to avoid all the leaks and the innuendo and pull it basically away from Congress where they're gossiping like schoolgirls. And now we find out that there's leaks coming, perhaps, if the Washington Post is correct, and nobody else has it. Is with James Comey. Could this be somewhat of James Comey's revenge?
Mueller hired all these big-time attorneys, these Democratic attorneys that have gone up against the Supreme Court more than 100 times.
Right, and sure, and the White House has suggested that the leaks came from the FBI. So if it came from either one of them, that's just not good.
Right. If you're Robert Mueller, you got to put the fear of God in them. You better not leak this out because I'll prosecute you too. And even though Robert Mueller did interview for the FBI job, again, mysteriously, he might want it again after Comey got fired on May 9th. I'm just wondering where this comes from. And then also in the big picture, if everyone's okay with Mueller still in position.
Sure, but nonetheless,
friends with Comey.
After Comey's testimony, I think it was a layup that they were going to have to look into the obstruction of justice thing, and now we know for sure, apparently he is. Meanwhile, our other top story is the shooting of the congressional baseball practice, a whole new type of terrorism. Our next guest, Rodney Davis, says enough is enough.
This is a result, I believe, of political rhetorical terrorism. That has to stop.
Sarah is a fifth-grade teacher. When it comes to molding
to Osama bin Laden's old stomping ground in Afghanistan, the al-Qaeda's leader's old fortress in Tora Bora falling to the terror group Taliban fighters who previously controlled the complex, and they fled overnight after a week-long assault by ISIS. So the Taliban and ISIS are fighting each other. And Qatar sealing a $12 billion deal buying F-15 fighter jets from the United States. It comes amid a diplomatic crisis between Qatar and a number of its Gulf neighbors. And Turkish security agents facing charges after this insane attack on American protesters, which got remarkably undercovered. This happened outside Turkey's embassy last month. 12 bodyguards, including 2 Turkish Americans, now facing charges. The Turkish embassy blamed the violence on the protesters. Guys?
Thanks, Brian. A disturbing rise in vicious left-wing hate targeting the president being spewed by liberals across the country.
I have thought an awful lot about blowing up the White House.
Well, I'd like to punch him in the face.
We are here to be nasty.
Wow. Well, our next guest calls that political rhetoric terrorism, rhetorical terrorism, and demanding it stop now. Congressman Rodney Davis was at bat when that shooting started, and he joins us now. Good morning, Rodney. You know, when you see those images, you now knowing what happened to you and to so many others that are leaders in our country yesterday on the baseball field, it really hits home. I'm sure it does for you. What are your thoughts when you see those images now?
Well, it makes me more resolved to do what I can, not only as a member of Congress, but as an American first, to ratchet down this hateful rhetoric that we've seen on all sides and ensure that we take this lesson that I saw yesterday of an attack on innocent people and innocent civilians in a park and turn it into something good. Let's take this day and make yesterday's attack the new beginning so that we can all work together, which is what we do a majority of the time out here. Many people would be surprised, Ainsley, that Republicans and Democrats that serve in Congress actually get along. And we're going to show that tonight in our game, too.
Absolutely. And yesterday, both parties united. There are some congressmen who hope that, just like after 9/11, there's a season of unity in Washington, D.C. that lasts for a while. But, you know, it happened just 24 hours ago. It's 7:26 here in the East right now. It happened in the 7 o'clock hour. You know, how does it feel as a Republican to know that in this particular case you were targeted because you're a member of that political party?
Steve, it's still kind of surreal to me. I see the video and that's been replayed over and over, and I heard it on the last interview that I did. It really sets the stage for what actually happened. And then you see some of the evidence about the shooter coming out. And his politics were his religion. And that's what we have to make sure that we as Americans say, enough is enough. If politics and policy differences are what divide us, there are ways to solve those, and that's called in election time. Do it at the ballot box.
Right.
We solve our policy differences when we vote on the House floor. Let's do it that way.
Congressman, what was going through your mind when you heard those bullets ring out? I know you were at home plate, you were at bat. Did you call your family? What were your thoughts?
Well, Ainsley, when I was at bat, I heard a very loud noise. I thought it was a construction site dropping a large piece of metal. And then the next words I heard were, "Run, he's got a gun." I did that, dove into the dugout, eventually worked my way to a safer area, and a good Samaritan. And I saw on the story last night, his name's Ben Childers. Ben, your wife, thank you for letting us in. We were able to call 911, and we weren't the first 911 call, but I got a chance to talk to my wife and my kids. And Ben, I can't thank you enough for allowing me that opportunity to do that.
What did you say to your wife and your kids?
I said, there's been a shooting. Dad's okay. I'll call you back when I can.
Wow.
Absolutely. Congressman, I heard when the managers, the Republican and the Democrat, for the baseball game tonight, had a press conference yesterday. The Democrats invited all the Republicans to have dinner with them last night. I haven't heard yet how many Republicans took them up on that offer.
You know, I wasn't able to go, so I don't have a count either, but just the sheer fact that Mike Doyle, the manager of the Democrats, made such a great gesture, it should show the American people that this game that we play for charity and raise hundreds of thousands of dollars for DC charities, this isn't just about grown men like me and others playing a baseball game at Nat Stadium. This is about showing the American people that we can come together for causes and also have our policy differences, but not take them personally.
Yeah, it was great to hear Nancy Pelosi speak out against and condemn this type of a thing, to hear from Bernie Sanders. And then we all saw that picture of the Democrats that were praying. The Democratic team was practicing, and they were praying for all of you guys. And Congressman Scalise is from Louisiana, and I understand you all are going to wear LSU gear tonight.
Yeah, we're going to wear some LSU gear. I've got my purple tie on in honor of my good buddy Steve Scalise.
That's great.
And that's a tragic scene I'll never forget of my friend laying on that field motionless. And that's why this hateful rhetoric's got to stop.
Yeah. Absolutely. If folks, you mentioned it is a fundraiser tonight. If people would like to help out, it's congressionalbaseball.org is the website.
Where does that money go?
There's a number of charities, 5 I think now.
Yes.
Okay,
right.
Great.
Congressman Rodney Davis from the great state of Illinois. Sir, thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm glad you're here to talk to us today, and Congressman Scalise is in our prayers this morning.
Thank you, Stephen Ainsley.
Thank you.
All right, coming up on this Thursday, United Airlines facing another lawsuit. The reason you're looking at it. So does the passenger have a case for what happened right there?
And Dan Bongino is a former Secret Service agent, and he says it's time to reevaluate how we protect our elected leaders. He's going to join us live next.
All right, it was just 24 hours ago to right now where out at Simpson Field in Alexandria, Virginia, that gunman started shooting at members of Congress. Dan Bongino is a former Secret Service agent, former New York City Police Department officer, and joins us live from Palm Beach Gardens. Dan, we had Senator Rand Paul on with us yesterday, and he said that had there not been a member of House leadership there, Steve Scalise, who had a unit with him of 2 special agents, nobody would have survived because essentially it would have been a massacre.
Yeah, Steve, this would have been the worst political assassination, political bloodbath in American history, and I don't use those terms lightly. Think about it. This was not New York City, where the Fox studio is, where there's an NYPD police officer, 30 seconds away at any given moment. Yeah. I was a New York City cop. This was a relatively suburban area where the cops were probably 3 to 5 minutes away. Do you know the kind of damage you can do in 3 to 5 minutes when you're firing at unarmed unarmed people who don't have a firearm to protect themselves. Thank God, and I am not using the Lord's name, I literally mean thank God that those brave United States Capitol Police officers, God bless their souls, they were there. One of them was actually hit and still re-engaged. There is no doubt in my mind they saved the lives of innumerable members of Congress there. So, I mean, it would have been a really, really tragically more horrific situation.
Dan, they're not allowed to carry in D.C., but they don't have security detail. Unless you're a top-ranking official, you get the security. But most of them don't have security and they're not allowed to carry. So if they want to protect themselves, what are they supposed to do?
You know, Ainsley, I ran for Congress. I lost by 1 point. And when it's interesting because there was this period where there was a recount where we thought we had won the race. And you know, one of the first things that jumped into my head was, thank God I have a carry permit from being a former Secret Service agent under this FLIOSA law, because that's the first thing that jumped in my head. How do these guys go to D.C. with no security detail in this hot political climate where they're essentially sitting ducks? The first thing my wife and I discussed was, that's insanity. Now, it didn't affect me because I had a carry permit, but this is an insane situation we have right now. It's crazy.
But we can't afford, you would think, to protect 535 members of Congress like we do leadership. So what do you do right now? One thing a lot of people will say is at town halls, I'm not doing them. Too much of a risk. Going outside in the public, now I'm not doing them. Too much of a risk.
Yeah, you know, I think that may be a bridge too far. I mean, they have to get out there. And frankly, Brian, a lot of them want to get reelected. And you know, a lot of them are just brave enough to say, hey, I don't care. I'm willing to accept the risk. But here's a solution, because I don't want to complain about it without giving the viewers a way to fix it. Unlike the presidency, when I was in the Secret Service, where we know where the president is. He's in D.C. and he's in the White House the overwhelming majority of the time. That's not the case with congressional members. They split their time about 50-50 from home districts in D.C. We can get better collaboration with U.S. Park Police and Metro in D.C. And in their home districts, we can get better collaboration with local sheriffs and local PD to pick these guys up on kind of a door-to-door security detail. They don't have to sit there 24 hours. But there's a better way to do this, and there are solutions out there.
Surely. Dan, let's talk a little bit about, while the police are reluctant to talk about a motive if they figured it out yet, it looks like it was politically motivated. I mean, the guy was a Bernie Sanders supporter. Yeah. He hated Trump. His Facebook made it very clear. So
he also hated Hillary.
You know, politics motivated him. And we've just had Congressman Davis on, who said to some of these people, this kind of thing is their religion, where they feel so strongly about it. How did we get to this stage? I know there was a lot of rancor during the Obama years and during the Clinton years and in the Bush 43 years, but now it is the temperature is so hot.
Yeah. You know, Steve, you will never understand any of this if you don't understand critical theory. This sick political theory that has imbued our academics, our Hollywood elitists, these limousine liberals. It's this idea that, and this is important, we as conservatives and libertarians are fighting for ideas, lower taxes, patient-controlled health care. That's not what the other side is fighting. Make no mistake. The other side is fighting bad people. They don't care about your ideas. They don't want you to speak. They don't want you to open your mouth. They think you are a bad person. I don't think liberals are bad people. I think you have a set of really crappy ideas, but I don't think you're a bad person. The other side is not saying that. I'm not talking about all Democrats. I'm talking about the far left. They legitimately believe you are evil. You want to kill grandma. You want to steal their money. You want to put minority kids in poor schools. They absolutely believe this. And then we wonder why an entire generation of kids shows up at a Trump rally, and some of them just want to beat up the other side. What, I mean, this is insane. The political temperature is off the charts. We're melting down.
I think Democrats would tell you they're a little bit worried about their far left. You could see that Hillary Clinton could not figure out what happened to her party. Whatever you think of her as a candidate, she was not far left. And now there was even the story in the New York Times last week is that people are afraid of rankling the far left because they're the ones who speak the loudest and seem to have the most momentum.
You know, Brian, that's crap. because the Democrats, this was an easy decision to go out yesterday and condemn an attempted murderer, a political assassin, the guy who shot at them. I'm glad they did it. Thank you,
Right.
Nancy Pelosi, for saying that. But where the hell were you when Black Lives Matter was calling for pigs in a blanket, fry them like bacon? What do we want? Dead cops. When do we want them now? Where were you when the Southern Poverty Law Center was calling people hate mongers and a hate group because they didn't want men in the women's room? Where the hell were you for that one? You just showed up yesterday with an attempted murder? I mean, thankfully you spoke out, but now they're worried about their far left group. You know what? Give me a break. They had an opportunity years ago to correct this.
Dan, do you think if she had done that, or other leaders on the left, if they had spoken out and condemned some of those other things, that this kind of thing, like the shooting yesterday, would not have happened?
Ainsley, you're darn right. Look at conservatives. We police ourselves. You had a talk show host use Barack Obama's middle name at a rally, and it was an international conspiracy to take down Barack Obama. The press went nuts. John McCain called the guy out at his own rally for using Obama's middle name. Yet we do this ourselves. But on the left, you have a group calling for dead cops now, and they're allowed to visit the White House, and nobody sees a problem with this. Folks, this is literally the definition of clinical insanity.
So should those on the right take down Alex Jones and Mike Savage?
We've already done it. There are people. I don't even appear on one of those guys' shows. He asked me to come on a long time ago because I don't agree with what they do. We already are doing this. We have a sensible movement of conservatives who understand that we can't provide ideological refuge for that. The left hasn't gotten that point yet. They've given these guys an ideological home to set up their base, and now they're afraid of them. You know what? You reap what you sow, and you've done this. In yesterday's example, I believe a lot of this could have been stopped if they would have shut this down, this hateful rhetoric, a long time ago.
Well, ultimately, what it comes down to is those members of Congress are really lucky. Members of the Capitol Police were there in attendance, saved a lot of lives. Dan Bongino, we thank you very much for joining us today from Palm Beach Gardens down in Florida.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. All right, let's hand it over to Jill. You know, it's some headlines for us. Hello.
Good morning to you guys, to you at home as well. Let's start with this. In just a few hours, the Supreme Court will formally welcome its newest member, Justice Neil Gorsuch. President Trump expected to attend the ceremony, which comes more than 2 months after Gorsuch's swearing in. He's the president's pick to replace the late Justice Antonin Scalia. Gorsuch reinstates the 9-seat court's conservative majority. Prime Minister of Australia, Malcolm Turnbull, poking fun at President Trump in leaked audio over the topics of fake polls and having a Russian guy as his helper. Take a look.
Not the fake polls. Not the fake polls. They're the ones we're not winning in. We're winning in the real polls.
The so-called jokes made at the Australian Parliament's midwinter ball. A new lawsuit for United Airlines after an employee is caught on camera appearing to knock out a passenger at Houston's airport. Take a look. 71-year-old Ronald Tigner suing for $1 million, claiming employees refused to help him with his boarding pass, made fun of him, then pushed him over. Video showing the man fall to the floor, the impact knocking him out. Employees seen standing over his unconscious body, another traveler stopping to help. The worker who pushed him now fired and charged. United settled another lawsuit in April after dragging a passenger off a flight. The comedy with a conservative slant that got canned by liberal Hollywood may get a new shot.
I know what microaggressions are. It's the latest liberal attack at free speech. And a lot of fun if you do them right.
CMT considering picking up Last Man Standing starring Tim Allen. ABC taking heat last month after canceling the show despite good ratings. The company claims it's all about business, not politics. Let's look at your headlines, guys. Send it back to you.
Last man standing, still standing, apparently.
Yep,
All right.
apparently.
Jillian, thank you.
Thank you.
When a gunman opened fire at a Republican baseball practice yesterday, about 24 hours ago, many of our elected leaders ran for their lives. But Alabama Representative Mo Brooks used his belt as a tourniquet on Steve Scalise. He's going to join us to talk about that about a half an hour from right now.
Americans don't scare easily, but today's annual congressional baseball game, you know what? It's actually still going to go on. And Doug Luzader is live from Washington, D.C. with the very latest for us.
Today's weather is brought to you by Nexium 24.